The rot in the floorboards was a familiar scent, a damp, earthy perfume of decay that clung to the thin blanket Mina pulled tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind howled a lonely song through the skeletal branches of the blackwood trees, a sound that mirrored the hollow ache in her own chest. It was the night of the full moon. For the rest of the Crescent Horn pack, it was a time of power, of revelry, of running wild and free under the silver gaze of their goddess. For Mina, it was just another night of being less. She was a shifter who could not shift, a wolf without a wolf. In a society that measured worth in the strength of one's beast, the sharpness of one's claws, and the ferocity of one's spirit, she was a walking, breathing void. An Omega by default, but less than even that. Omegas served. Mina was simply tolerated, a stain on her family's already tarnished legacy. Her gaze drifted to the small, cracked window pane. Through the grime, she could see the distant bonfire at the heart of the pack enclave, a furious orange eye in the darkness. She could almost hear the laughter, the growls of playful dominance, the thrumming energy of 200 wolves preparing for the hunt. Her sister Iris would be there. Iris, with her beautiful silver coat and her place at the beta's side. Iris, who was everything Mina was not. A bitter lump formed in Mina's throat. She loved her sister, she truly did, but Iris's brilliance only made Mina's own shadows seem deeper. Her parents had died years ago, a tragic hunting accident that the elders still whispered about, a failure that had cast the first stone in the wall of her family's disgrace. Mina's own defect had been the final, damning seal. She pushed herself up from the lumpy mattress, the cold of the floor seeping through the soles of her worn slippers. The tiny, one-room shack at the very edge of the territory was her world. It was a place of ghosts and dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the gloom. Loneliness was a physical presence here, a second person in the room with cold hands and a whispering voice that reminded her of all her failings. Tonight, it was unbearable. The primal energy of the full moon vibrated in her bones, a cruel echo of an instinct she couldn't answer. She needed a distraction. Anything to drown out the sounds of the life she was barred from. Her eyes landed on a small, dark object on her cluttered nightstand, a burner phone. A relic from a trader who'd passed through months ago, discarded because it was nearly out of credit. She'd found it in a dustbin, a forgotten piece of a world beyond the woods. She didn't know why she'd kept it. On a whim, she picked it up. The screen glowed weakly, a single bar of service flickering. A crazy, reckless idea sparked in her mind. A tiny rebellion against the crushing silence. She would send a message to a stranger, a ghost reaching out to another ghost. Her fingers, clumsy from the cold, tapped out a random sequence of numbers. She didn't think, just let her thumb press the digits. Then she navigated to the message screen. What did one say to a complete stranger? The absurdity of it made a hysterical giggle bubble in her chest. It felt like screaming into the void. She typed out the stupidest, most groan-worthy shifter joke she could think of, one her father used to tell her before everything went wrong. Why don't werewolves ever play poker in the jungle? She paused, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She typed the punchline, too many cheetahs. She stared at the words on the screen. It was pathetic. It was foolish. It was the act of a girl so profoundly alone she was texting jokes to the universe. With a sigh that turned into a shuddering breath, she pressed send. The screen confirmed, message sent. Mina tossed the phone back onto the nightstand and flopped back onto the bed, pulling the blanket over her head. The wind shrieked. The distant revelry continued. Nothing had changed. It was a stupid, pointless gesture. She closed her eyes, praying for a sleep that would not come, completely unaware that she had not just screamed into the void. The void was about to scream back. Miles away, in the heart of a fortress carved from black mountain stone, agony was a living thing. Alistair, the Alpha King of the Shadowfang Consortium, was chained to his throne. The silver chains, thick as a man's wrist and etched with runes of suppression, sizzled where they touched his skin, but they were a necessary torment. They were the only things that kept the monster inside him from tearing its way out and slaughtering everyone within a 10-mile radius. The full moon was not a gift for him. It was a curse, an ancient malediction that twisted his wolf, the powerful, noble beast it should have been, into a grotesque parody of rage and pain. It warped his flesh, turning his shift into a nightmare of breaking bones and screaming muscles. What emerged was not a wolf, but a creature of shadow and fury that knew only destruction. His guards, the most elite and loyal of his pack, stood outside the throne room, their faces grim. They knew the sounds, the guttural roars, the sickening snaps of bone, the violent thrashing against his restraints. They knew their king was battling a war within himself, a war he was slowly losing. Julian, his beta, and the closest thing he had to a friend, stood just inside the massive iron-wrought doors, his fists clenched. He watched Alistair, whose human form was contorted on the obsidian throne, sweat beading on his brow, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrests. His eyes, usually the color of molten gold, were flickering with a malevolent black energy. "Your Majesty," Julian said, his voice low and steady. "Breathe. Fight it." "It grows stronger," Alistair gritted out, each word a shard of glass in his throat. The pain was a fire, licking at the edges of his control, promising the sweet release of oblivion if he would just let go. The beast wanted out. It wanted to hunt. It wanted to kill. He focused on the pain from the silver, letting it anchor him to his humanity. The burning was a dull counterpoint to the volcanic agony of the curse. He could feel his bones beginning to strain, his teeth elongating into fangs. It was happening. He was losing. And then, a sound. A soft electronic chime that was utterly alien in the stone hall of torment. It came from a small, sleek device sitting on a pedestal beside the throne, a satellite phone, encrypted, untraceable. Its number known to only 3 beings in the entire world. A direct line to the king, reserved for matters of apocalyptic importance. Julian flinched, his eyes widening in alarm. Who would dare? Alistair's head snapped up. Through the red haze of his agony, a different kind of fury burned. An intrusion. A violation. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of the phone. The screen lit up. A message. From an unknown number. His first instinct was to crush the device, to hunt down whoever had breached his sanctum and tear them limb from limb. But as his gaze fell upon the words, something impossible happened. "Why don't werewolves ever play poker in the jungle?" The words made no sense. They were nonsense. Too many cheetahs. It was a joke, a childish, idiotic joke, and in the midst of the inferno consuming his soul, it was like a single drop of cool water on a raging fire. It didn't extinguish the blaze, not even close, but for one fleeting, incomprehensible second, the pain receded. The beast in his mind, poised to shatter its cage, paused. It was a moment of utter confusion. The sheer, unexpected absurdity of it was a pattern interrupt in the litany of his suffering. The moment passed. The pain crashed back in, but something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the monolithic wall of his agony. A question. "Who?" "Julian!" Alistair snarled, the sound more beast than man. He held up the phone. "Trace this. Find the source. Now." Julian stared, bewildered. "My lord? What is it?" "An anomaly," Alistair growled, his body shuddering with a new wave of torment. But beneath the pain, a new, cold current of curiosity flowed. I want them. I want them here. He didn't know why. He didn't know if he wanted to kill them or question them. He only knew that for the first time in years, something other than his curse had gotten his full, undivided attention. Julian nodded, snatching the phone. He turned and ran from the room, shouting for the pack's trackers and technicians. Alistair threw his head back and roared, the sound a mix of agony and something else. Something new. A strange, predatory interest. In a hovel miles away, a girl who thought she was invisible had just lit a beacon, and the most dangerous predator in the world had seen it. And he was coming. Mina must have drifted into a shallow, restless sleep because the sound that woke her was not the wind, but a sharp, authoritative knock on her door. It wasn't the hesitant tap of a concerned neighbor or the familiar rhythm of her sister. This was a sound that held no uncertainty. It was the sound of a command. She sat bolt upright, her heart instantly hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. No one ever came to her door. Especially not after dark. Especially not on a full moon. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The only answer was another knock, harder this time, rattling the flimsy door in its frame. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of sleep. This was wrong. All wrong. Her pack was at the bonfire. The only other people who roamed these woods were rogues or, worse, hunters. She scrambled out of bed, her mind racing. There was nowhere to run. Her shack had only one door and the single, tiny window. She was cornered. Her hand fumbled for the heaviest object on her nightstand. A thick, hard-bound book of old pack legends. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. The third knock was a blow that splintered the wood around the latch. The door shuddered, and then, with a screech of protesting metal, it was simply pushed open. Two figures filled the doorway, massive silhouettes against the moonlit dark. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their presence radiating a quiet, lethal competence that made the air in the tiny shack feel thick and hard to breathe. They were Shadowfang warriors. Mina had only ever heard stories of their brutality, their silence, their absolute loyalty to their monstrous king. Panic seized her, raw and suffocating. Then a third figure stepped between them, and the panic turned to pure, unadulterated terror. He was taller than his guards, broader. He wore no tactical gear, just a simple black tunic and trousers that did nothing to hide the sheer, terrifying power coiled in his frame. His hair was the color of midnight, and his face was all hard planes and sharp angles, beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were gold, a searing, molten gold that seemed to burn with an inner light, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that stripped her bare. He radiated an aura of absolute authority, a pressure that buckled her knees and stole the air from her lungs. It was him. The stories, the whispers, the nightmares made flesh. Alistair, the Alpha King. He took a step into the room, and the shack seemed to shrink around him. His gaze swept over the pathetic space, the cracked walls, the threadbare blanket, the single sputtering candle, before landing back on her. She stood frozen, the book held weakly in her hand. His nostrils flared slightly, as if tasting the air. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to attack, to tear her apart for the sheer offense of her existence. Instead, he spoke. His voice was a low, deep rumble, like stones grinding together in the heart of a mountain. "You sent a message." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Mina's mind went completely blank. The message. The stupid, pathetic joke. It couldn't be. It was impossible. She'd typed a random number. How could... She stammered, her throat dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Alistair took another step, his golden eyes narrowing. He was so close now she could feel the heat rolling off him. She could smell the scent of pine, ozone, and something else. A dark, musky scent of immense power and a faint, almost imperceptible undercurrent of pain. Her senses, usually dull and unresponsive, were screaming at her. Every instinct she didn't know she had was telling her this man was a predator of the highest order. He gestured with his chin toward the nightstand. The phone. One of his guards moved with silent speed, plucking the cheap burner from the table and handing it to the king. Alistair glanced at it, then back at her. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "Too many cheetahs," he quoted, his tone flat and devoid of any humor. The sound of her own foolish words from his lips was mortifying. It was like having a god read her diary aloud. "It was a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I typed a number. It was random. I'm sorry." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. She felt like an insect under a lens. Every flaw, every fear, every ounce of her worthlessness laid bare for his inspection. She saw a tremor run through his hand, so slight she might have imagined it, and a flicker of that black energy in his eyes again. He was fighting something. The stories were true. He was unstable, a monster. Her inner calming presence, the one she barely understood, reacted instinctively. A wave of profound empathy washed over her. Beneath the terrifying power, she sensed a chasm of agony. This man wasn't just cruel. He was in constant, excruciating pain. "You will come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "What? Why?" The question flew from her lips before she could stop it. Defiance was suicide, but the idea of being taken by him, dragged to his black fortress, was a fate worse than a quick death. "Because you are an anomaly," he said, his golden eyes boring into hers. "And I do not tolerate anomalies I do not control." He turned, his broad back to her, a clear dismissal. "Bring her." Before she could protest further, before she could even scream, the two guards were on her. They moved with an efficiency that was terrifying. One moment she was standing by her bed, the next she was being lifted. A thick cloth bag being slipped over her head, plunging her into a world of rough fabric and suffocating darkness. She was thrown over a hard shoulder like a sack of grain, and all she could hear was the crunch of boots on the forest floor as she was carried away from the only home she had ever known. The journey was a blur of disorientation and fear. The air inside the bag was stale and hot, and the rhythmic jostling of her captor's stride made her stomach churn. Mina lost all track of time. It could have been minutes or hours. She was adrift in a sea of blackness, her only reality the hard shoulder digging into her ribs and the terrifying uncertainty of her fate. Finally, the movement stopped. She heard the groan of massive hinges, the sound of a heavy door closing with a deafening boom that echoed in the sudden stillness. The air changed, growing colder, smelling of stone and old power. She was inside his fortress. The bag was ripped from her head. She gasped, blinking against the sudden light. It wasn't bright, but after the total darkness, the torchlight seemed blinding. She was in a vast hall, the ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Black banners bearing the crest of a snarling wolf's head hung from stone walls, and the floor was polished obsidian that reflected the flickering flames like a dark mirror. It was less a home and more a mausoleum, cold and imposing. Alistair stood before her, his back to a colossal fireplace where a low fire burned, casting dancing shadows that made him look even more formidable. He had dismissed his guards. They were alone. "Why am I here?" Mina asked, finding a sliver of courage in her desperation. She was already a prisoner. What more could he do to her? He didn't answer immediately. He walked to a heavy, carved wooden table and poured a dark liquid from a crystal decanter into a glass. Wine, she assumed. He swirled it, his gaze distant, as if she wasn't even there. "That number you called," he said finally, his voice soft but carrying in the cavernous room. "It is known to 3 individuals besides myself. One is the Alpha of the Northern Ridge, the other is the matriarch of the Sunstone Conclave, the third is my Beta. None of them are prone to telling jokes." He turned to face her, leaning back against the table. "So you can imagine my surprise. My security is absolute. My privacy is inviolable. And yet, a wolfless girl in a hovel at the edge of nowhere pierces it with a piece of trash technology and a ridiculous pun." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't just texted a stranger. She had somehow bypassed the defenses of the most powerful and paranoid alpha on the continent. "It was an accident," she insisted, her voice shaking. "A 1 in a billion chance." "I don't believe in chance," he stated flatly. He took a sip of his wine, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "When you stood before me in that pathetic shack, I felt something." Mina held her breath. "The beast within me," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "The one that screams for release every moment of every day. It grew quiet, just for a second, as it did when I read your message." He looked down at his glass, a frown creasing his brow. "It is an unwelcome sensation, and I need to understand it." So this was it. She wasn't a prisoner because she was a threat. She was a curiosity, a lab rat to be studied. The realization was no less terrifying. "I don't have any special powers," she said quickly, trying to make herself as small and uninteresting as possible. "I'm nothing. Just a mistake. My pack. Everyone knows it." "Your pack is a collection of fools who value brawn over all else," he retorted with casual disdain. "They wouldn't recognize a true power if it bit them." He pushed off the table and began to pace, his movements fluid and predatory. "You will stay here. You will be given chambers. You will be fed. You will not try to leave. In return, you will exist near me." The sheer arrogance of the command was breathtaking. He had kidnapped her to use her as a living tranquilizer. "And if I refuse?" she dared to ask. He stopped pacing and turned to her. The air crackled with his power. "Then I will return you to the edge of your forest, and you can take your chances with the rogues that hunt there. Or perhaps your uncle would be pleased to see you return in disgrace, having been handled and discarded by the Shadowfang King. I am sure he would find a suitable use for you." The mention of her Uncle Marcus sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold stone hall. Marcus, her father's brother, was the acting head of her disgraced family. He was a cruel, traditionalist brute who saw Mina as a constant source of shame. He had been trying to marry her off to any decrepit old alpha who would have her, just to be rid of her. Alistair's threat was not an idle one. She had no choice. A prisoner in a cold fortress, or a pawn in her uncle's cruel games. Both were cages. At least this one came with food and a room. "Fine," she choked out, the word tasting like ash. "I'll stay." A flicker of something, satisfaction, relief, crossed his features before being masked again by his cold indifference. "Julian will show you to your chambers." He raised his voice slightly. "Julian!" The Beta appeared almost instantly, his expression a mixture of concern for his king and wary curiosity toward Mina. He was younger than Alistair, with a leaner build and intelligent gray eyes. "Take her to the Queen's suites in the West Wing," Alistair commanded, turning back to the fire. Julian's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "My lord?" "The Queen's suites have been sealed for 50 years. "Then unseal them," Alistair said without turning around. "See that she has whatever she needs." It was a dismissal, The king was done with her for now. Julian gestured for Mina to follow, his face a carefully neutral mask. As she walked away, Mina couldn't help but cast one last look over her shoulder. Alistair stood silhouetted against the flames, a solitary, powerful figure surrounded by shadows. He looked like a king, yes, but he also looked like the loneliest man in the world. And for some reason, that thought scared her more than his anger ever could. The Queen's suites were not what Mina had expected. After the oppressive, martial grandeur of the main hall, she had anticipated a cell, perhaps a slightly more comfortable one, but a cell nonetheless. Instead, Julian led her through a series of corridors to a pair of heavy oak doors, which he unsealed with a large, ornate iron key. He pushed them open, and Mina gasped. The rooms were covered in thick layers of dust and draped in white sheets, like sleeping ghosts. But even in their neglected state, their beauty was undeniable. A large sitting room with a cold marble fireplace, a spacious bedroom with a canopied bed large enough for 4 people, and an adjoining bathing chamber with a sunken tub carved from a single piece of jade-colored stone. Tall, arched windows looked out over a sheer drop, the valley floor 1,000 feet below, dotted with the distant lights of a settlement. The king's mother was the last to reside here, Julian explained, his voice quiet. After her death, he had them sealed. Why is he putting me here? Mina whispered, running a hand over the silken fabric of a dust sheet. This was a place of honor, of reverence. It felt like sacrilege for someone like her to even breathe the air here. Julian's expression was troubled. I do not know. The king has not been himself for a very long time. Your arrival is unexpected. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He is not a cruel man, despite what the stories say. He is afflicted. The curse, Mina said, more a statement than a question. Julian's jaw tightened. Be careful what you speak of within these walls. Some things are better left unsaid. He gestured to the room. Servants will be sent to clean and prepare everything. They will bring you food, clothing. If you require anything, you need only ask. He turned to leave, but Mina stopped him. Julian? He paused at the door. Why does the full moon hurt him? She asked softly. For us, for shifters, it's a source of power. Julian's face was a mask of sorrow. For him, the power is poison. An ancestor of his made a pact with a shadow spirit for victory in a great war. The power was won, but it came with a price, a corruption of the bloodline. For most, it lies dormant. For him, the strongest of his line in centuries, it has fully awakened. The moon doesn't empower his wolf. It feeds the monster that wears its skin. He left, closing the doors softly behind him, leaving Mina alone with the dust and the ghosts and the terrible new knowledge. Alistair wasn't just a king burdened by a curse. He was the inheritor of a poisoned legacy. Over the next few days, a strange routine began to form. Servants, silent and efficient, cleaned the suites until they gleamed, filling the wardrobes with beautiful gowns and the pantry with food. They treated her with a baffling mixture of fear and reverence, bowing their heads and avoiding her eyes. She was the king's something. No one knew what, and so they defaulted to treating her like royalty. Alistair would summon her, usually in the evenings. He never did it himself. A guard would appear at her door with a simple message. The king requires your presence. She would be led to his private study, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling, a fire always crackling in the hearth. He would be sitting in a large leather armchair, a glass of wine or brandy in his hand. And he would command her to talk. Tell me a story, he'd said the first time, his voice a low growl. She had frozen, her mind a complete blank. What kind of story? Any kind. I do not care. Just fill the silence. And so, she did. Hesitantly at first, she recounted the old pack legends her father used to tell her. Tales of the first wolves, of moon goddesses and sun gods, of epic hunts and fated mates. As she spoke, she would watch him. He would lean his head back, close his eyes, and the tense, rigid lines of his body would soften. The tremors in his hands would cease. The pained furrow between his brows would smooth out. Her voice, her presence, it was a balm to his tormented soul. He was using her like a drug, and she knew it. But a strange thing happened as the days turned into a week. She began to not mind. She saw the man beneath the monster, the prisoner inside the king. She saw the profound exhaustion in his eyes, the deep, lonely ache that no amount of power or wealth could soothe. One evening, she finished a story about a wolf who fell in love with a star. Alistair was silent for a long time, his eyes still closed. "There are no such things as fated mates," he said, his voice rough with some suppressed emotion. "There is only power and weakness, and the bargains we make to survive." "I don't believe that," Mina said softly, emboldened by the strange intimacy of their sessions. "I think there's more than that." He opened his eyes, and the full force of his golden gaze hit her. "You are a naive child. You believe in fairy tales because your life has been devoid of anything else." The words were cruel, but his tone lacked its usual bite. It was weary. "Maybe," she conceded, "but fairy tales have kept me alive. Hope is a kind of power, too." He stared at her, and for a fleeting moment she saw a flicker of something other than pain or command in his eyes. It looked like wonder, and it made her heart skip a beat. The fear she felt for him was slowly, terrifyingly, being replaced by something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The news of Mina's abduction spread like wildfire through the Crescent Horn pack. It was all anyone could talk about. The wolfless girl, the shame of the pack, taken by the dreaded Shadowfang King. Most assumed she was dead, a passing amusement for a monstrous tyrant. Her sister Iris was frantic with worry. She pleaded with the pack alpha, a grizzled old wolf named Gregor, to mount a rescue, but Gregor was pragmatic and, frankly, terrified of Alistair. "She is gone, Iris," he said, his voice heavy. "To go after her is to invite the wrath of the Shadowfang down upon us all. We would be annihilated. Her life is not worth the lives of the entire pack." But not everyone saw it as a tragedy. For Marcus, Mina's uncle, it was an opportunity. He stood before the Council of Elders, his face a mask of performative grief. "My poor niece," he boomed, his voice dripping with false sorrow, "stolen from us." But we must ask ourselves, was she truly stolen? Or did she go willingly? A murmur went through the assembled wolves. "She was always different," Marcus continued, planting the seeds of poison, unhappy with her lot. "Perhaps the promises of a king, even a dark one, were too much for her to resist. Perhaps she betrayed us." He let the accusation hang in the air. It was a masterful stroke. By painting Mina as a traitor, he could absolve himself of any responsibility for her. Severing the final tie to his disgraced brother's legacy, he could consolidate his own power, positioning himself as the stalwart defender of pack tradition against such weakness and betrayal. "We must be strong," Marcus declared. "We must purge her memory. She is no longer Crescent Horn. She is a creature of the shadows now. Let the shadows keep her." Meanwhile, in Alistair's fortress, Mina remained blissfully unaware of her uncle's machinations. Her world had shrunk to the queen's suites and the king's study. The fear she had initially felt had mellowed into a wary sort of comfort. The castle was quiet, the servants were respectful, and her evenings with Alistair had become the focal point of her existence. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his mood. The clenching of his jaw meant the curse was whispering to him. The distant look in his eyes meant he was lost in painful memories. She learned that he hated the taste of honey but enjoyed the scent of lavender, a fact she discovered when a servant brought her lavender-scented soaps. He had commented on it, his voice rough. "It is pleasant." One night, as she was recounting a rather dull history of textile trading routes she'd read in one of his books, he cut her off. "Stop." She fell silent immediately, her heart fluttering with anxiety. Had she bored him? "Tell me about yourself," he said, his golden eyes intent. "There's nothing to tell," she deflected. "Do not lie to me," he warned, his voice low. "I have shared the nature of my curse with no one but Julian. You know my greatest weakness. I will know something of you." It was a fair trade, in its own twisted way. So, haltingly, she told him. She spoke of her parents, of the hunting accident, of the shame that had followed. She told him about being wolfless, about the taunts of the other children, the pitying looks, the profound isolation. She spoke of her sister Iris, of the love and the jealousy that warred within her heart. She talked for over an hour, laying her pathetic little life bare before him. When she finished, her throat was tight with unshed tears. She expected him to mock her, to call her weak. Instead, he was silent for a long time. Then he rose from his chair, walked over to where she sat on a small ottoman, and knelt before her. The motion was so unexpected it shocked her into stillness. The Alpha King, who commanded legions and made other alphas tremble, was kneeling at her feet. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that shot through her entire body. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle. "No one who endures such a thing is weak," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "They called you wolfless. They were blind. Your spirit is stronger than any beast I have ever known." In that moment, looking into his burning golden eyes, seeing the raw sincerity there, Mina's carefully constructed walls crumbled. The fear, the resentment, the cautious curiosity, it all melted away, replaced by a wave of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. He saw her. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her and not seeing a defect or a disgrace. They were seeing strength. And as he knelt before her, his thumb stroking her cheek, she knew she was completely and irrevocably lost. She was falling for the monster. Or perhaps, she was falling for the man trapped inside. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. Alistair's touch was a brand on her skin, his words a balm on wounds she hadn't known were still bleeding. The mate pull, the fated bond that shifters whispered about in legends, was no longer a gentle hum beneath the surface. It was a roaring crescendo, a physical force pulling them together. She could feel his own shock, his own dawning recognition mirroring her own. He pulled his hand back as if burned, a look of turmoil on his face. He rose to his feet abruptly, turning his back on her. "Leave!" he rasped, his voice strained. "Alistair!" she began, her own voice trembling. "Go!" he roared, the sound echoing with the monster's fury. He swept his arm across a nearby table, sending books and a decanter crashing to the floor. Mina flinched back, her heart pounding. The tender moment was shattered, replaced by the familiar violence of his inner battle. She saw his shoulders hunching, his body tensing as if against a great pain. He was fighting himself, fighting the realization of what she was to him. A mate. The one thing his cursed life could never allow. Without another word, she fled the study, her own emotions in a tangled wreck. She ran back to the safety of her rooms, the Queen's suites, that now felt more like a cage than ever before. She collapsed onto her bed, the king's raw declaration of her strength warring with his violent rejection. He saw her, but he didn't want her. The hope that had bloomed in her chest withered into a familiar aching pain. Of course. How could a monster like him ever accept a mate? How could a wolfless nobody ever be a queen? Alistair did not summon her for the next 3 days. The silence from his end of the castle was a heavy, suffocating presence. Mina paced her rooms like a caged animal, her anxiety mounting with every passing hour. The servants who brought her meals were more timid than ever, their eyes wide with a fear she now understood was a reflection of the king's own state. He must be in agony, pushing her away because her presence, the presence of his mate, was likely intensifying his struggle. On the third night, Julian appeared at her door. His face was etched with exhaustion and worry. "You have to come," he said, his voice urgent. "It's the king. He's bad. Worse than I've ever seen him." "He told me to leave," Mina protested, her fear for him warring with the sting of his rejection. "He is a fool, and he is dying," Julian snapped, his usual composure gone. "The curse. It feeds on his pain, his isolation. Realizing you are his mate, and believing he cannot have you, it has given the beast a foothold like never before. He has locked himself in the throne room. He won't let me in, but he might let you." Without another thought, Mina followed him. They raced through the cold, silent corridors to the massive iron doors of the throne room. From within, she could hear a low, continuous growl, punctuated by the sickening sound of something heavy hitting the stone walls. "Alistair!" Julian shouted, banging his fist on the door. "Let me in!" The only answer was a furious roar that vibrated through the thick metal. Mina stepped forward, her heart in her throat. She placed a trembling hand on the cold iron. "Alistair," she called, her voice soft. "It's Mina. Please, let me help you." The growling inside stopped. There was a moment of absolute silence, so profound it was more terrifying than the noise. Then, with a slow, grinding screech, the heavy bar on the inside of the door was lifted. Julian looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Go," he urged. "You are the only one who can reach him now." Taking a deep breath, Mina pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The room was a wreck. Tapestries were torn from the walls, furniture was splintered, and deep gouges scarred the stone floor. And in the center of the room, by the cold hearth, stood Alistair. But it was not the man she knew. The transformation was incomplete, a horrific halfway point between man and beast. His form was twisted, elongated. Black fur sprouted in patches on his skin. His hands were tipped with vicious black claws, and his face was distorted into a wolven snout, his fangs dripping with saliva. His golden eyes were gone, replaced by pits of roiling black shadow. The monster was wearing his skin, and it was winning. It turned its head, the shadows in its eyes fixing on her. A low, predatory snarl rumbled in its chest. It took a step toward her, a thing of pure nightmare and rage. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee for her life. But looking at the twisted, agonized creature before her, she didn't see a monster. She saw Alistair, trapped inside, suffering an agony she couldn't imagine. Her fear was eclipsed by a fierce, protective wave of love. "Alistair," she said again, her voice shaking but clear. She took a step toward him. "I'm here. I'm not afraid of you." The beast snarled, lunging forward, not to attack, but to slam the doors shut behind her, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the slivers of moonlight from the high windows. It wanted her cornered. It wanted her fear. Instead of screaming, she stood her ground. "I know you're in there," she whispered into the gloom. "Fight it. You told me my spirit was strong. Yours is stronger. You are a king, not a monster." She took another step, and another, until she was only a few feet away. She could smell the ozone of its dark power, the scent of his blood and pain. The shadowy creature watched her, its head cocked, confused by her lack of terror. "You are my mate, Alistair," she said, the words feeling truer than anything she had ever spoken. "And I will not abandon you." She reached out her hand. It was the single most terrifying thing she had ever done. Her small, pale hand reached for the monstrous, snarling face. The beast flinched, a guttural growl ripping from its throat. It could tear her arm off in a second, but it didn't. As her fingers made contact with the coarse fur on its cheek, a violent shudder racked its entire body. A pained, human sound escaped its throat. The roiling blackness in its eyes flickered, and for a single, breathtaking second, she saw a flash of molten gold. He was still in there, and he was fighting his way back to her. The touch was a cataclysm. For the beast, it was an agonizing burn, a touch of purity against its corrupt essence. For Alistair, buried deep within, it was a lifeline, a beacon in the roaring darkness. Mina's scent, her voice, her impossible courage, it was an anchor for his ravaged humanity. The creature thrashed, shaking its head, trying to dislodge her hand, but it was a half-hearted gesture. It was confused. Its programming was simple: rage, kill, destroy. Her response did not compute. She did not fight. She did not flee. She touched it with tenderness. "It's all right," Mina whispered, her voice a soothing balm against the inferno of his curse. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she stepped closer, placing her other hand on its heaving chest. She could feel the frantic, discordant rhythm of its heart, a war drum beating a path to self-destruction. She focused, not on the monster, but on the man inside. She poured all her empathy, all her newfound love, all the strange, calming power she possessed into her touch. She didn't try to fight the darkness. She simply tried to reach the light buried within it. "Come back to me, Alistair," she pleaded. "I see you. I'm not leaving." A loud, agonized howl tore from the creature's throat, a sound of such profound pain and conflict that it brought tears to Mina's eyes. The black fur began to recede. The twisted limbs began to straighten. The monstrous snout shrank back into the hard, familiar planes of Alistair's face. He collapsed, the transformation reversing with brutal speed. He fell to his knees, his human form restored, shuddering violently. He was gasping for air, his body drenched in sweat. Mina dropped to her knees with him, her arms going around him, holding him up as tremors racked his powerful frame. He buried his face in her shoulder, his breathing ragged. His arms came up to wrap around her waist, holding onto her with a desperate strength, as if she were the only thing keeping him from being swept away. "Mina," he rasped, his voice raw and broken. Her name on his lips was a prayer. "I'm here," she sobbed, relief and love washing through her in a dizzying wave. She held him tighter, running her hands through his damp hair, over his back, reassuring both of them that he was real, he was human, he was here. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the cold stone floor of the ruined throne room, clinging to each other in the semi-darkness. The king and the outcast, both stripped bare of their titles, their defenses, their pasts. All that was left was the undeniable, earth-shattering truth of their bond. Finally, he pulled back, his hands framing her face. His golden eyes, clear and vibrant once more, searched hers. They were filled with awe, with pain, with a desperate, burgeoning hope. "How?" he whispered. "No one has ever. It has never." "I told you," she said, a watery smile touching her lips. "I'm not afraid of you." He let out a shuddering breath, his forehead resting against hers. "You should be. I almost killed you." But you didn't, she countered softly. You fought it. You came back. He looked at her, his expression one of profound, agonizing conflict. You are my mate. The moon goddess must have a cruel sense of humor. To grant me the one thing that could save me, only to ensure that my very nature would destroy it. You won't destroy me, she said with a certainty that surprised even herself. We won't let it. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air grew thick again, but this time it was not with menace, but with a tension of a different kind. The world narrowed to the space between them, the scent of her skin, the warmth of her breath. The mate pull was an irresistible tide. He leaned in, slow, hesitant, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She couldn't. She met him halfway, her eyes fluttering shut as his lips finally met hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, a collision of two starving souls. It was filled with all the pain of his centuries-old curse and all the loneliness of her entire life. It was a claiming, a surrender, a promise. It was the breaking of one kind of curse and the sealing of another, far more wonderful one. But as they were lost in the rediscovery of each other, a new threat was gathering, one that had nothing to do with ancient magic and everything to do with mortal greed. Julian's frantic banging on the door broke them apart. My lord! Alistair! Riders are approaching, banners of the Crescent Horn Pack, and they are not alone. They fly the flags of the Stonecrest and Red River Alphas as well. It's an army. Alistair stiffened, pulling away from Mina, his face instantly hardening back into the mask of the warrior king. He rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. Marcus, he snarled, her uncle. He had not just cast her out, he had used her as a pretext for war. He had rallied rival packs Alistair had subjugated or held in a tense alliance, to challenge his rule. They're saying you're a monster, that you stole and murdered an innocent from their pack. Julian yelled through the door. They are demanding justice. They are calling for your head. Alistair looked from the door to Mina, his golden eyes blazing with a cold, protective fury. The tender, vulnerable man was gone, replaced by the predator. He didn't come to rescue you, Alistair said, his voice a low growl. He came to use your death to seize my throne. The fortress, once a place of silent torment, sprang to life with the grim efficiency of a disturbed hornet's nest. The deep horns of the Shadowfang watchtowers bellowed across the valley, a challenge and a warning. Warriors in black armor moved with disciplined haste along the battlements, their eyes scanning the approaching force. Alistair led Mina from the throne room, his hand securely in hers. He did not let her go. Julian met them in the corridor, his face pale but resolute. They've made camp at the base of the mountain pass, Julian reported, falling into step beside them. 3 packs united. At least 500 warriors. Marcus of Crescent Horn is their spokesman. He is a dog barking for bigger masters, Alistair growled. Stonecrest and Red River have chafed under my rule for years. They see this as a chance to break my consortium. They use the girl's honor as a shield for their ambition. He glanced down at Mina, his grip tightening. They think me weakened. Distracted. Are you? Julian asked quietly, his gaze flickering to Mina. Alistair's answer was a cold smile that held no warmth. They have made a fatal error. They have not distracted me. They have given me something to fight for. He paused, turning to face his beta. Take her to the royal bunker. Seal it. No one gets in or out until I give the order. No, Mina said, her voice ringing with unexpected strength in the stone hallway. Both men stopped and stared at her. Mina, this is not a debate, Alistair said, his tone hardening. You will be safe. Safe and useless, she countered, pulling her hand from his to face him fully. Alistair, listen to me. They are using my name as their justification. If I hide, it proves their point. It makes me a victim, a ghost. But if I stand with you, it shatters their narrative. They will try to kill you, he snarled, his protective instincts overriding all else. Let them try, she said, her chin high. You think my spirit is strong? Let me show you. I spent my whole life hiding. I will not hide now. Not when it matters. Julian looked between them, a slow look of admiration dawning on his face. He had only ever seen his king command and be obeyed. He had never seen anyone, man or woman, stand up to him like this. Alistair stared at her, a war raging in his eyes. The king wanted to lock her away. The man, the mate, saw the fire in her spirit that he had just praised. He saw the wolf she didn't have, burning brightly in her soul. To deny her, this would be to deny the very thing he had fallen for. Very well, he said finally, the words costing him. You will stay by my side. But if the battle turns, Julian has my explicit order to drag you to the bunker, whether you agree or not. Is that understood? Understood. She agreed, her heart soaring. He was listening to her. He was treating her as a partner, not a possession. They ascended to the main parapet, a wide stone walkway overlooking the single winding path that led up to the fortress gates. The wind was sharp and cold, whipping Mina's hair across her face and tugging at the simple dress she wore. Below, the valley floor was dotted with the campfires of the enemy army, a constellation of hostile stars. From the assembled forces below, a small party of 3 riders broke away, carrying a white flag of parley. They rode to the base of the fortress walls. In the center was Marcus, his face puffed up with self-importance. On either side of him were the grim-faced alphas of the Stonecrest and Red River packs. Alistair of Shadowfang, Marcus bellowed, his voice carrying on the wind. You stand accused of abducting and murdering my niece, Mina of Crescent Horn. You are a cursed beast, a blight upon our lands. Your reign of terror is over. Surrender now, and we will grant your warriors mercy. Alistair stepped to the edge of the parapet, a commanding and terrifying figure looking down on them. Mina stood just behind him, her hand resting on his arm. You speak of murder, Marcus, Alistair called down, his voice effortlessly projecting over the valley, dripping with contempt. Yet you seem surprised to see a ghost. He stepped aside, pulling Mina forward into the torchlight, into full view of the army below. A collective gasp went through the assembled soldiers. Down below, Marcus's face went from pompous to slack-jawed shock. His entire justification, the lie he had built his alliance on, was standing on the wall beside his enemy, looking very much alive. And not just alive. She was standing there willingly, her hand on the Monster King's arm. Mina? Marcus sputtered, his voice losing its booming confidence. What is this trickery? Has he enchanted you, child? Mina stepped forward, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. There is no trickery, uncle, she called down, her voice carrying with surprising force. And I am no longer a child. King Alistair did not abduct me. He saved me. He saved me from a life of shame and scorn in a pack that values only what it can see. He has shown me more honor and respect in 2 weeks than you have shown me in my entire life. She looked past him, to the hundreds of warriors listening. You have been led here on a lie. Your alphas have joined my uncle's personal vendetta. The Shadowfang King has broken no laws. He has committed no crime. Your war is with a phantom. Her words struck home. Murmurs rippled through the army. Warriors looked at each other, then at their alphas, their expressions now laced with doubt. The righteous fire of their cause had been doused. The Red River Alpha, a hulking brute named Fen, snarled, She is bewitched! The beast's mate, it is a stain on all of us. Attack! Slay the monster and his whore! He had overplayed his hand. Calling a fated mate a whore was a deep insult to the moon goddess herself. The doubt in the army curdled into unease. Alistair smiled, a true predator's smile this time. "You have heard the Luna," he boomed, his voice resonating with power. He was publicly naming her, claiming her, in front of them all. "She stands with me. I am the rightful king of this territory, and you stand upon my lands with weapons drawn. You were given a chance to leave in peace. You have refused. So you will leave in pieces." He turned, his eyes blazing with golden fire. "Archers!" With a single word, the battle began. But Mina had already won the first, most important victory. She had taken their reason and turned it to ash. The first volley of arrows from the fortress walls was not aimed to kill. They were warnings, fired with pinpoint accuracy to land just in front of the enemy line, a shower of deadly rain that kicked up dirt and sent horses rearing. It was a display of discipline and power. Alistair was showing them this was a fight they could not win. But the rival alphas were committed. Pride and ambition had blinded them. With roars of fury, Fen of Red River and Boren of Stonecrest ordered the advance. The army surged forward, a wave of fur and steel, charging up the narrow mountain pass. "You wanted to stay," Alistair said to Mina, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "Now you will see what a real battle looks like." He pushed her gently but firmly behind a thick stone merlon. "Stay here. Do not move." He drew his sword, a magnificent blade of dark rippling steel, and the king was gone, replaced by the general. His commands were sharp, precise, and instantly obeyed. Catapults launched massive stones that crashed into the charging ranks, sending bodies flying. Archers unleashed volley after volley, their arrows finding their marks in the tightly packed warriors below. The battle was brutal and one-sided. The Shadowfang warriors were better trained, better equipped, and defending a superior position. The narrow pass created a bottleneck, a kill zone where the attackers' superior numbers meant nothing. Mina watched in horror and awe. She had never seen such violence, the air filled with the sounds of screaming men and dying wolves, the clash of steel, the roar of alphas. Yet, through it all, she felt a strange calm. Her place was here. Her fate was tied to the man who commanded this storm of death with such lethal grace. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. The attacking force broke against the fortress walls like a wave against a cliff, falling back, regrouping and charging again, only to be decimated. Their morale was crumbling. They had been lied to, and now they were dying for that lie. Marcus, her uncle, stayed well back from the fighting, a coward hiding behind the warriors he had doomed. He watched his grab for power fall apart, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Then, the Red River Alpha, Fen, did something desperate. Using his immense strength, he managed to scale a section of the wall that was less steep, followed by a handful of his elite guard. They crested the parapet, landing right in the middle of a group of Shadowfang archers. Chaos erupted on the wall. Fen was a berserker, a whirlwind of claws and fury in his half-shifted form. He tore through the archers, clearing a space, his eyes wild and fixed on his true target. Alistair. Alistair met his charge without hesitation. Their swords clashed, sparks flying in the torchlight. It was a battle of titans, Alpha against Alpha. The other warriors gave them a wide berth, their own skirmishes paling in comparison. Mina's heart was in her throat as she watched. Fen was bigger, wilder. But Alistair was faster, more skilled, his every move economical and deadly. Still, the fight was taking its toll. Alistair was still recovering from his battle with the curse. A slight slowness, a fractional hesitation, was all Fen needed. The Red River Alpha fainted high, then kicked Alistair's legs out from under him. Alistair went down, his head hitting the stone with a sickening crack. Fen roared in triumph, raising his sword for the killing blow. Time seemed to slow down. Mina saw the sword begin its descent. She saw Julian fighting his way toward them, but he was too far. There was no one to stop it. Without thinking, she moved. She darted from behind the Merlon, grabbing a fallen Shadowfang banner from the ground. The wooden pole was heavy and awkward, but adrenaline gave her strength. "No!" she screamed, and with all her might, she swung the heavy banner pole like a club, aiming for the back of Fen's knees. The blow connected with a wet crack. It wasn't enough to fell the massive alpha, but the surprise and the sudden sharp pain made him stumble. His killing blow went wide, his sword scraping harmlessly against the stone inches from Alistair's head. That 1 second was all Alistair needed. He rolled, sweeping his legs out and hooking Fen's ankle, pulling him off balance. The giant alpha crashed to the ground. In a single fluid motion, Alistair was on top of him, his own sword pressed against Fen's throat. The battle on the wall stopped. Everyone stared. Fen looked from the blade at his throat to the small, wolfless girl standing over him, panting, still holding the broken banner pole. He had been brought down not by the king, but by the king's mate. The humiliation was absolute. "The battle is over," Alistair said, his voice cold and clear. He looked out over the wall at the remaining forces, who had faltered, seeing their alpha defeated. "Go home. Tell them what you saw here today. Tell them the Shadowfang King has his Luna. Our reign has just begun." He pressed the blade, and the Red River Alpha's life ended with a gurgle. The remaining attackers on the wall threw down their weapons in surrender. Below, the army broke, its spirit shattered. They fled, a disorganized rabble, leaving their dead and their foolish ambitions behind. Alistair rose, his eyes finding Mina's across the blood-soaked stone. He walked to her, ignoring the surrendering enemies, ignoring Julian, who had finally reached him. He stopped in front of her, his face unreadable. She thought he would be angry. She had disobeyed him. She had put herself in mortal danger. Instead, he reached out and gently took the splintered banner pole from her hands, letting it fall to the ground. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away the grime and a stray drop of blood that wasn't hers. "I told you to stay put," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "You were in trouble," she whispered back, her body starting to tremble as the adrenaline faded. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first true, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly handsome. "So I was," he said. He leaned down and kissed her, right there on the blood-soaked battlements, in front of his warriors and his defeated enemies. It was not a desperate kiss this time. It was a kiss of triumph, of gratitude, of profound, soul-deep love. It was a king kissing his queen, his savior, his mate. In the aftermath of the failed siege, a new order began to settle over the mountain. The surviving warriors of the Stonecrest and Red River packs were disarmed and held in the lower courtyards, their fate to be decided by the king. But there was one prisoner Alistair wished to deal with personally. Marcus was dragged before the throne, not in the grand hall, but in Alistair's private study, the same room where Mina had first told him her stories. He was bruised, disheveled, and stripped of all his pompous authority. He knelt on the floor, trembling, flanked by 2 formidable Shadowfang guards. Alistair sat in his large leather armchair, a glass of brandy in his hand, looking as calm as if he were discussing the weather. Mina stood beside his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her presence was a silent statement of power that Marcus could not fail to understand. "You cost me a great deal of time and resources, Marcus," Alistair began, his voice deceptively mild. "You cost many wolves their lives." "All for a lie. All for a pathetic attempt to climb over the bodies of your family to gain a little standing." "She is a defect," Marcus spat, his fear making him reckless. He glared at Mina. She shamed our bloodline. I did what was necessary to cleanse our family's honor. Honor? Alistair laughed, a cold, humorless sound. You speak of honor, you who would use your own niece as a sacrificial lamb for your ambition? You who would lie to your allies and lead them to their deaths? You have no honor. You are a parasite. Alistair leaned forward, the mildness vanishing from his expression, replaced by the icy fury of a king. Mina is the Luna of the Shadowfang. She is my mate. By insulting her, you have insulted me. By threatening her, you have signed your own death warrant. Marcus paled, his eyes wide with terror. Mercy, your majesty. I beg you, I was wrong. Mercy is a courtesy, not an obligation, Alistair said coldly. He glanced up at Mina. His fate, however, is not mine to decide. Mina's breath caught. She looked from Alistair's impassive face to her uncle's terrified one. This was her tormentor, the man who had made her life a living hell, who had just tried to have her, and the man she loved killed. She has no say, Marcus shrieked. She is a wolfless runt. She is your queen, Alistair corrected him, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, and you will address her as such. Mina stepped forward, her heart pounding. She looked down at the man who had caused her so much pain. She could ask for his death. Alistair would grant it in a heartbeat. The thought held a certain grim satisfaction, an eye for an eye. But as she looked at him, cowering and pathetic, she felt no triumph, only a profound pity. He was a creature of the system that had hurt her, a man so defined by its cruel rules that he couldn't see anything beyond them. To kill him would be to become like him, to answer cruelty with cruelty. My whole life, Mina said, her voice quiet but firm, I was told that strength was about claws and teeth and the power to dominate. But I learned something else in this castle. I learned that true strength is about resilience. It's about empathy. It's about building things up, not tearing them down. She looked at Alistair, and he gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He trusted her judgment. She turned back to Marcus. Killing you would be easy, but it would solve nothing. It would just be more of the same violence that has defined our world for too long. She took a deep breath. You will be stripped of your rank and titles. You will return to the Crescent Horn Pack not as a leader, but as an Omega. You will spend the rest of your days serving the pack you tried to lead to ruin. You will learn what it is to be powerless. You will learn humility. That is my judgment. Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. It was a fate worse than death, to be stripped of everything he valued, to live out his days in service and shame, judged by the very defect he despised. Alistair smiled faintly. A wise and fitting sentence, he said. He gestured to the guards. Take him away. See that the Luna's command is carried out. As Marcus was dragged away, still sputtering in disbelief, Alistair rose and took Mina in his arms. I would have killed him for you, he murmured into her hair. I know, she whispered back, leaning into his strength. But that's your way. This is mine. He pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes soft. It seems your way is becoming mine. With the external threats neutralized and her personal demons vanquished, there was only one thing left to do. The next evening, Alistair gathered the entire Shadowfang pack in the Grand Hall. He stood on the dais before the throne, with Mina by his side. For centuries, my bloodline has carried a curse, he announced, his voice ringing with power and a new, raw honesty. It has twisted my wolf, isolated me, and turned my reign into one of fear. I ruled from the shadows because I was a creature of them. He paused, his gaze sweeping over his stunned warriors. No more. My mate has shown me a different path. She has faced the monster inside me and did not flinch. Her courage has broken the curse's hold. Her strength is not of the claw, but of the heart. And it is a power greater than any I have ever known. He turned to Mina, taking her hand and lifting it for all to see. This is Mina, your Luna. She is my mate, my queen, and my salvation. From this day forward, the Shadowfang pack will not be defined by its ferocity alone, but by its heart. We will be a bastion not just of power, but of justice. This is my decree. He then lowered his head, exposing his neck to her in the most sacred gesture a shifter could make. The offering of the mating bite. It was an act of ultimate trust and vulnerability. Tears streamed down Mina's face as she leaned in. Her own canines, usually small and human, elongated slightly, a faint echo of the wolf she didn't have. She bit down gently on the space where his neck met his shoulder, marking him as hers, just as he had marked her with his love and acceptance. A jolt of pure energy, warm and golden, shot between them, sealing their bond. The pack erupted into a thunderous roar of approval, a sound of loyalty and celebration that shook the fortress to its foundations. The wolfless girl from the edge of the woods was now a queen, beloved and powerful in her own right, forever bound to the king she had saved from his own darkness. 1 year later, the fortress of the Shadowfang was a different place. The black banners still hung in the great hall, but now they were interspersed with new ones of silver and gold, symbols of the moon and the sun, of the union that had transformed the pack. Laughter could be heard in the corridors, and the scent of baking bread often mingled with the old smells of stone and steel. The reign of fear had given way to an era of respect, Alistair's strength tempered by Mina's compassion. Mina stood on the balcony of the Queen's Suites, looking out over the valley. It was the night of the full moon. A year ago, this night had been one of terror and agony for the man she loved. Now it was a celebration. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "What is my beautiful queen thinking about?" Alistair murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble against her ear. "About how much can change in a year," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. She placed a hand over his on her stomach, where a small but distinct bump was beginning to show. A miracle. The healers had said a wolfless shifter could never conceive, especially not with a powerful alpha. They had been wrong. "Everything has changed," he agreed, his hand spreading protectively over their unborn child. "You changed it." Below them, in the castle's main courtyard, a bonfire burned brightly. The Shadowfang pack was gathered, but they were not alone. Delegations from a dozen other packs, including a reformed Crescent Horn led by Mina's sister Iris, mingled with them. After the battle, Alistair had not sought retribution. Guided by Mina, he had offered new alliances, based not on subjugation, but on mutual respect. The Shadowfang Consortium was stronger than ever. From the courtyard, a magnificent wolf looked up at them. It was larger than any other, with a coat of pure, shining black and eyes of intelligent, molten gold. It was not a monster. It was Alistair's wolf, whole and uncorrupted. The curse was well and truly broken, vanquished by love and acceptance. Now, on the full moon, he could shift freely, a king in both forms. He often chose to run with his pack, a symbol of their renewed, healthy spirit. He nuzzled her neck, his human form content to stay with her tonight. "Are you happy, Mina?" he asked, his voice soft with a vulnerability that was now reserved only for her. She turned in his arms, her own filled with a love so vast it still sometimes overwhelmed her. She looked into his golden eyes, once filled with so much pain, now shining with adoration. "I found a home," she said softly. "I found a family. I found a purpose." She rose on her toes and kissed him gently. "I have never been happier." He smiled, the beautiful, unguarded smile that was hers alone, and kissed her back. A long, slow kiss full of promises kept, and a future filled with light. The wind still sang through the mountains, but it was no longer a lonely sound. It was a lullaby for a healing kingdom, for a king who had found his heart, and for the wolfless Luna who had shown them all the true meaning of strength.